He has everything a modern man is told he needs to win in love: intelligence, success, a body women admire, a six-figure salary, a home he owns outright, a busy social calendar. On paper, he's irresistible. But in practice, he hasn't had a single meaningful relationship in 3 years. What's even more painful is that he watches other men, less intelligent, less accomplished, less attractive, effortlessly attract, date, and keep the very kind of women he desires. How is that possible? How can a man who checks all the boxes still find himself perpetually alone? Here's the great question. If it's not money, looks, or personality, what's the hidden weakness that quietly keeps capable men single? When asked, he has answers, plenty of them. He blames dating apps, social media, the unfairness of female hypergamy, or even cultural shifts that, in his mind, have broken dating beyond repair. Yet, none of these external reasons explain why his friends succeed where he fails. None of them account for why he keeps hitting the same walls, date after date, month after month. He believes he is logical. He believes he is unlucky. But what he doesn't realize is that the very thing sabotaging his relationships is not external at all, it's internal. It's not about his appearance, his career, or his personality. It's something far more fundamental, invisible to the naked eye, and devastating in its effect. It's a force so subtle that he doesn't even notice it operating, but women can sense it within minutes of meeting him. It repels them not because of who he is, but because of how he behaves under its control. It's what I call the invisible saboteur. This saboteur is not mere nervousness or anxiety. It isn't the typical fear most men acknowledge. It's something much deeper. Prioritization of emotional comfort over meaningful goals. It is the unconscious decision, repeated daily, to avoid discomfort, even when avoidance guarantees long-term failure. And this is the paradox. The invisible saboteur convinces men that they are re-protecting themselves from harm. But in reality, they're shielding themselves from the very growth and opportunities they claim to want. Imagine an internal protocol constantly scanning every situation for potential awkwardness, rejection, or risk. That's the comfort preservation protocol. It's a silent system inside the mind that automatically calculates how to minimize discomfort. Don't approach her. You might be embarrassed. Don't set that boundary. She might get upset. Don't take charge. Someone might criticize you. Each choice feels rational, even wise, in the moment. But when repeated for years, these micro-decisions build a prison. The man believes he's protecting himself, when in truth, he's isolating himself. This invisible saboteur wears many disguises. For some men, it shows up as approach paralysis, the inability to initiate contact with women they find attractive. They plan, they prepare. They study psychology, fashion, fitness, and even memorize conversation scripts. They tell themselves they'll approach when they feel ready, yet that moment never comes. Instead, the rejection amplification matrix magnifies the imagined pain of a woman saying no, until it feels worse than decades of loneliness. They'd rather live with constant longing than face a brief sting of rejection. And so opportunities evaporate right in front of them. For others, the saboteur emerges as the emotional capitulation crisis. These men might actually get into relationships, but once inside, they surrender their standards, goals, and even values the moment a woman expresses negative emotion. She's upset, she's sad, she's angry, and instantly, he abandons his position. All to restore her emotional comfort. What he doesn't see is that he's teaching her something dangerous. That her emotional displays can control his behavior. Over time, this erodes his authenticity. He becomes a weaker, edited version of himself, terrified of upsetting her, and in doing so, he loses her respect and attraction. The saboteur also breeds leadership abdication syndrome, an age that preaches equality. Many men confuse partnership with passivity. They stop making decisions, stop providing direction, stop taking responsibility. Every choice becomes a joint committee meeting where he automatically defers to her. He fears being judged as controlling or domineering, not realizing that most women crave decisiveness and direction in their partners. The result is a direction vacuum, a drifting relationship that frustrates her and drains him. Until eventually she leaves not because he was cruel or selfish, but because he was indecisive. Beneath all of these lies, the scarcity prison system. This is the deep, gnawing fear that he cannot do better than what he currently doesn't have. This system convinces him to accept disrespect, tolerate poor treatment, and stay in relationships that don't serve him. It whispers that if he leaves, he'll never find another woman, or worse, he'll end up alone forever. It chains him to mediocrity, not because he lacks options, but because he's deluded into believing he doesn't. Together, these forces invert his fear hierarchy. Instead of fearing permanent loneliness more than temporary rejection, he fears the opposite. He becomes more afraid of a 5-minute conversation going badly than of spending the next 5 years isolated. He becomes more afraid of his girlfriend's 5-minute outburst than of sacrificing his life's mission. He becomes more afraid of looking foolish than of never becoming the man he was meant to be. And so, he clings to comfort, even as comfort strangles him. This inversion fuels the comfort addiction epidemic. Men today are addicted not to substances, but to predictability, to safety, to never feeling the butterflies of nervousness or the sting of embarrassment. But in avoiding discomfort, they avoid life itself. The result is a sensation-numbing effect, where even ordinary emotions feel unbearable. They retreat further into their safe routines, their small worlds, their screens, till their lives shrink into predictable but suffocating patterns. Here lies the brutal truth. Most men aren't single because they lack money, looks, or status. They're single because they obey fear. Let the saboteur dictate their lives, avoiding the short-term discomfort that would create long-term fulfillment. They would rather endure familiar dissatisfaction than risk the unknown. They'd rather live with regret than face rejection. But what if the real question isn't how do I get women, but how do I break free from the invisible saboteur? Because until that force is confronted, no amount of money, muscles, or social status will matter. The saboteur will sabotage everything, every date, every relationship, every chance at real connection. And so the challenge begins here. It's not about eliminating fear, because fear will never fully disappear. It's about learning to act in spite of fear, about cultivating the courage to prioritize growth over comfort, purpose over safety, authenticity over performance. That is the path forward. That is the secret that separates men who build the relationships they want from men who remain trapped in cycles of loneliness, disappointment, and self-deception. But how exactly do you break free? How do you dismantle something that has silently guided your decisions for years, maybe decades? That's what we're going to uncover next.
So how does a man actually break free from this invisible saboteur? How does he stop being controlled by comfort, fear, and hesitation, and finally start living the life he's been capable of all along? The answer isn't found in quick tricks, cheesy pickup lines, or waiting for society to change. The answer lies in what I call the Courage Cultivation Protocol. The Courage Cultivation Protocol is not about eliminating fear. That's impossible. Fear is part of being human. The goal is to stop obeying fear, to stop letting fear dictate choices. Imagine this. You feel nervous about talking to a woman you find attractive. In the past, that nervousness would have been enough to stop you. The saboteur would whisper excuses, and you'd walk away. But under the Courage Cultivation Protocol, you still feel nervous, you simply don't obey it. You act anyway. That's the entire shift! This works through the discomfort desensitization process. Instead of avoiding uncomfortable situations, you begin exposing yourself to them gradually, consistently, deliberately. Maybe you start by asking strangers for the time. Maybe you start by holding eye contact a little longer than usual. These are small, controlled doses of discomfort. Over time, your mind adapts. What once felt terrifying becomes tolerable. What once seemed unbearable becomes just another moment. This is how psychological resilience is built. Not by theory, but by practice. Another element is the fear subordination practice. This means acknowledging that fear will always exist, but learning to act in spite of it. Think of a soldier going into battle. He doesn't wait until he feels no fear. He goes anyway because his mission matters more than his comfort. That's what men must learn to do in dating and relationships. To feel fear, to recognize it, and then to choose action regardless. Every time you subordinate fear, you strengthen your capacity for future courage. It becomes a the confidence-building loop. Each act of bravery feeds the next, gradually transforming you from a man who avoids challenge into a man who seeks it. But courage alone is not enough. It must be guided by values. That's why the protocol includes the values clarification exercise. You must decide what matters more than comfort. Is it building a family? Living authentically? Pursuing your mission? When you anchor your actions to values instead of feelings, you stop being reactive and start being intentional. You stop asking, what feels safe right now? And start asking, what serves my purpose long term? As you apply these principles, something begins to shift. You start to see that courage is not a trait reserved for the naturally confident. It's a skill. It can be practiced. It can be developed. Men you think were born confident are usually just men who practiced courage long enough to make it look natural. That's the secret most never realize. The larger purpose of this process is what I call the Masculine Reclamation Project, because breaking free of the saboteur isn't just about dating it about reclaiming your authentic masculine identity. For too long, fear, social conditioning, and comfort addiction have suppressed natural masculine behavior. The Reclamation Project is about taking it back. It starts with natural expression liberation. This means allowing yourself to express your genuine thoughts, preferences, and desires, instead of editing yourself to avoid conflict or criticism. Too many men live as watered-down versions of themselves, terrified of rocking the boat. But women aren't attracted to men who edit themselves into blandness. They're attracted to authenticity. The irony is that when you stop performing and start showing your real self, you discover that authenticity is far more magnetic than performance ever was.
Then comes the leadership restoration process. This doesn't mean becoming domineering or authoritarian. It means reclaiming your ability to set direction, make decisions, and take responsibility for outcomes. It means you stop asking permission for everything and start acting as though your choices matter, because they do. Most women don't actually want passive men who defer endlessly. They want partners who can lead with confidence, without arrogance, without apology. Another vital part of reclamation is the boundary establishment campaign. This is where you learn to say no, to refuse demands, requests, or expectations that don't align with your values or goals. This is hard for men controlled by the saboteur, because they've trained themselves to keep everyone else comfortable at their own expense. But boundaries are not acts of cruelty. They're acts of integrity. When you enforce them, you teach women and everyone else that your life has structure, purpose, and standards. And paradoxically, that strength of boundary is what makes you more attractive, not less. All of this leads to the authenticity attraction effect. When you live as your genuine self, when you lead with decisiveness, when you maintain your boundaries, something remarkable happens. Women respond. Not to the edited version of you, not to the careful performance, but to your real energy. They sense your authenticity, and it pulls them in. What once felt like a liability, being unapologetically yourself becomes your greatest asset. The final layer of the Reclamation Project is the Mission Prioritization Framework. This is where you stop organizing your life around women's comfort or society's approval, and instead structure it around your values and goals. Your career, your passions, your health, your growth. These are your mission. And here's the paradox again. When you live mission first, women are drawn to you even more strongly, because nothing is more attractive than a man who knows where he's going. And this brings us to the deeper truth. Most men believe women are repelled by masculinity. They believe they need to be softer, safer, more agreeable. But the opposite is true. Women are drawn to authentic masculinity, decisive, confident, purposeful, unapologetic, not abusive, not controlling, simply real. And that's what the Reclamation Project gives back to men. The freedom to be what they always were, before fear stripped it away. So the choice every man faces is simple. He can continue obeying the invisible saboteur, letting fear dictate his decisions, and live out his years in quiet disappointment. Or he can embrace discomfort, reclaim his courage, and live as his authentic self. One path leads to regret accumulation, to wondering what if. For the rest of his life, The other path leads to real relationships, built on respect, attraction, and shared purpose. This is why the true question is not, why am I single? The true question is, what am I more afraid of, temporary discomfort or permanent dissatisfaction? Because whichever one you fear more will control your life. If you fear discomfort more, the saboteur will win. If you fear dissatisfaction more, you will act in spite of fear, and you will win. The hidden weakness that keeps men single is not lack of status, looks, or skill. It's obedience to fear. The invisible saboteur is always whispering, always calculating, always trying to keep you safe. But safety is the enemy of satisfaction. To overcome it, you don't need tricks. You don't need approval. You don't even need certainty. You need courage, the willingness to step into discomfort, to risk rejection, to enforce boundaries, to lead without apology, and to live as your authentic self. When you do, something extraordinary happens. The relationships you've always wanted stop feeling impossible. They stop feeling like accidents reserved for luckier men. They become the natural result of living as who you truly are. And the irony is, once you stop chasing comfort, you discover a deeper comfort than you ever imagined, the comfort of living honestly, courageously, and unapologetically as a man.